Welcome to this webinar where we will discuss some of the benefits of reading books to kids, with kids and for kids. I'm Suzzane Barchers. I'm the chair of the advisory board at Lingokids. I'm a writer myself and also a former teacher. And I'm delighted to introduce our guests. Chari Smith, a writer, composer, and pianist. Adrian Plitzco, a children's book author, a journalist, and an independent book and audiobook publisher. And last but not least, Precious, a writer, a UX UI designer, and a content producer. Welcome to all of you. Now on to our program. For many parents, engaging children in reading a book can be a challenge. We all want them to grow up to be lifetime readers. So at Lingokids, people often ask us, how can we make this process more interesting for the kids? And how can we keep kids focused on the story? So Adrian, I'm going to start with you, as I know you favor longer formats in your novels, and yet they're for young readers and listeners. How would you answer this? How do we keep our kids engaged in a story, particularly when it's an ongoing story?
There's not one easy answer to that one because it's actually a process. Well, the best thing is that as a parent or educator, you should take part in the journey of reading. So as long as you show interest in a story yourself, your kid will be interested as well. And to keep that interest awake, it's important that you sort of talk to your child, ask questions about the story, ask your child, how much have you read so far? What has happened in the story? What does it mean to you? What have you experienced? And what do you think what is happening next? Involve the child in a discussion and show him that you are interested as well. And maybe read together the same book or sit together and read different books, but create this atmosphere of we're now here together and do something together. Because reading is not a solitary thing. It can be a group thing as well. So talk to your child and show that you're interested as well.
Those are great points, Adrian. I know that I read aloud to my children, but particularly when I worked with kids who were slow readers or who weren't very interested, sometimes reading aloud a little bit and then having them read to me helped get them involved and keep us both interested. Now, Chari, you recently published a children's picture book called The Piano, and you involved your daughter in creating it. So you really went above and beyond the idea that Adrian had of keeping your kids involved. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how parents might use this example for their own work with getting their kids interested in reading and writing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my daughter Elle has been an artist since she could hold a crayon, like when she was 1, and she's 18 now. And I wrote the original story of The Piano about 20 years ago. So I was pretty determined to get it out there one way or another. And when she was about 7 years old, I asked her to illustrate, just to sketch it out. And she did do that with the original story. So it was an opportunity to work together. But then in March of 2020, when everything got really quiet, when COVID first hit, I felt like this was our opportunity during an uncertain time to get really creative. So we broke down tons of boxes and put them across the dining room table and storyboarded out the whole story that I had. And this is where we are collaborators, right? We're parent-child, but in this capacity, we were author-illustrator team. But one thing you can do is listen to a book and draw pictures as you're listening. Draw different pictures. Try to engage with the text of what would you draw, or what words would you put with that picture that are maybe different from what the author did. I think that's a really fun way that parents and their children can collaborate together and kind of really stretch their imagination to see what kinds of words and pictures they would want to do together.
That's great. And Adrian's book does have illustrations, but it's not heavily illustrated. So it would be a good jumping off point. Adrian has the characters in there, but I could see where a child might elaborate on that and create settings for it. Now, in contrast, Precious, your book, There Is Rice at Home, has really resonated as something to read with your children, because that is the whole point of the story, is the parent-child relationship. So tell us about how you were inspired to write this story.
Okay. So this was probably in 2018. And I was looking for a novel in my mother tongue, which is Yoruba, which is from Nigeria. And obviously, when you look for a book, you do the usuals. You go to Amazon or eBay, do your Googles. And I just couldn't find it at all, or any. And so I thought, okay, let me try and find maybe like a YA novel or like a children's book instead. So I kept on like reducing the age of trying to find a book in my language. And by the time I got to finding like kids books, they weren't really, at the time anyway, they weren't like original stories. They were just mainly translations of things like Handa's Hen. And I think I just had a moment where I was just like, okay, if there's one that doesn't exist, I'm just going to write one then. It's like, what would my future kids read? And that was pretty much literally just the inspiration, because I couldn't find the book. Which oddly enough, someone actually found it for me in Nigeria, because they don't actually print Yoruba novels anymore. And I got sent it over the Christmas period. I was just like, oh, if I'd actually found this book back in 2018, I probably never would have written my book. And now here is this book that I was looking for in my hand.
I've loved all your stories, all three of you, but that one in particular resonated with me because I could just hear myself telling my children, there's rice at home. There's rice at home. We're not going to have that treat. This is a quick summation of the story, is the family going different places, and the children always want the treats, and the mom is always saying, there's rice at home. And it has a little bit of a twist at the end. You'll all be sharing your stories in the Lingokids special podcast, which I'll share a little bit more about at the end of this. But it's dedicated to International Children's Book Day. And these will be audiobooks so that all of our listeners will have a chance to hear these wonderful writers' stories and what they have to say. Chari, what do you think about this trend towards audiobooks, where sometimes children are listening and seeing the pictures, or sometimes they're just listening to the story? This is something relatively new that certainly my generation didn't have an opportunity to participate in.
I think it's really exciting because I think reading versus listening that taps into very different senses, right? So when I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook, the reader is providing the intonation, the characters for me, right? I don't have to stretch there, but I am creating the images of the story in my head as I'm listening to it. The same thing is with reading. With reading, you have the pictures there, you have the words, but then I'm narrating it. So I'm creating those character voices with my own imagination. So I think reading versus listening with the audio stories, it's a real opportunity to stretch the imagination into different areas that reading takes us in a little bit of a different area. So I think they're both really exciting, and I think it's a great opportunity to continue to encourage kids to engage with their imaginations and listen to stories and read them.
Well, I think particularly with children who are reluctant readers, this gives them a chance to participate, and maybe they will take that next big step and become fluent readers themselves. Now, Precious, you don't have an audio version of your book, but you did something different. You translated it to how many different African languages?
So it is 14 languages altogether, and 13 of them are African and or Caribbean languages.
Now, why was that important to you to do that?
Oddly enough, English wasn't the original language, so I did actually write it in Yoruba first, and I did 6 other languages before I got to English. So I think the focus for me was to encourage like adults to teach their children like their mother tongue, and it also helps. I hear adults tend to message me and just be like, "Oh, I use it as well for myself to learn." So yeah, the focus really was like to actually be more about learning a language. rather than just being a storybook, I guess.
Well, I think the beauty of it too is it makes it accessible
Yeah.
to anybody, and that really resonates with me because I only speak one language well, which is English, and a little bit of French, and it would be great to have accessibility for all kids. So I admire what you've done with that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Adrian, I have another question for you. In your book, Pirate, the Barking Kookaburra, you use the iconic Australian bird, and in another book, you shared a story about Joey Lancelot. Now, for children outside of Australia, these characters are pretty exotic. Do you think it's the plot that helps kids engage with the story, or the extravagant creatures, or maybe it's both? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the extravagant or exotic creature definitely draws a child's attention and makes it curious. That's for sure. I mean, think of dinosaurs. Every child jumps at the dinosaur. You just show them a picture of dinosaur and they'll go, "Wow, fantastic, great, love it." But in the long run, it's not enough to be exotic. I mean, or to look exotic. In the long run, you have to be interesting as well. So if a dinosaur just for the whole story sits on a chair, if there is such a big chair, and does nothing, and is maybe yawning in between, it's quite boring, isn't it? So the plot is very, 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 very important in a story. And in the end, it doesn't matter what the character looks like, what he is, but as long as he or she does something interesting, experiences something different or interesting, then it keeps the attention of the reader as well. So take the child on the journey with the character, show him what the character does, what he has to go through, how he or she changes, hopefully in the end to the better. So plot, very important. Exotic or extravagant creature helps.
I agree. And I think also it gives the child something to relate to because your characters, although exotic, are still doing real life things and solving real life problems and having real life conflicts that have to be solved and resolved. And the friendships are an interesting part of that. Now, Chari, what would you suggest to parents who maybe want to co-create a book or something else together? Do you have any other tips for that?
Yeah, I think if you want to co-create something with your child is to look at what their interests are. Like in my case, it was my daughter. She's really interested in drawing, so it's easy to bring her in and to illustrate this book. With my son, he's 15. He's also a musician and he plays drums. So we've written songs together because I've been a composer my entire life. So we were able to engage and work on some songs together. So I think follow whatever your interests are, your own personal interests, and where they complement your child's interests. And then, I think staying into the flow state, right? And really enjoying the experience rather than focusing on an outcome of it being some like Grammy winning song or, award winning book or whatever it is, that it's really that journey that is the destination, as the saying goes. And I think that is true with any kind of creative process that you engage in with your child. The experience itself is the destination. And so to not get too attached to it being like a straight A student with it, right? And just having fun with your child rather than trying to make it something perfect or something, that you would showcase. It's just fun.
Oh, it can be a lot of work too, though. I'm thinking about those boxes with all the storyboarding. Now, Adrian, what about you? When you are immersed in your creativity, do you have collaborators? Do you bounce ideas off somebody else?
Well, no. Don't have collaborators now. Because I started, I don't know, I've sort of sometime in my life, I just put in my head, I want to be a writer, I want to write books. And it just was in the back of my mind for a long, long time. And then when I migrated to Australia, that was 30 years ago, I thought, yeah, this could be the right moment because I could be a different person in Australia because I'm originally from Switzerland. I could be a different person in Australia. So forget about the old Adrian Plitzco, start new and become a writer, what he always wanted. So I started writing a book, and that was a very solitary process anyway. I didn't talk to anyone about the ideas. I just had the idea and tried to execute it, and it turned out to become a book, and I found a publisher and it got sold. So that was great. And then it happened that I actually had a pet kangaroo, because I live in the country, and I did have a pet kangaroo, and the pet kangaroo had an accident and got badly injured. And that gave me the idea to write a story, because he was a very brave and courageous kangaroo. He had to go through a lot of trouble and came out on the other end, on the other side, as a different kangaroo. So that gave me the idea to write this story for my godchild in Germany. And my godchild came to visit me a year later, and I read that story to him, and he loved it. And I thought, oh, okay, he loves it. Why not show it to other people as well? But then nobody was interested in publishing that book. So, and since I was working for radio, I thought, well, then I'll turn it into a radio play and played it on my radio station where I work for. And the feedback was fantastic. So I looked for a publisher and found one, and that's how it started.
Very organically. And I have had those kinds of experiences myself, where something was right in front of me. And one of them was my grandson. And I asked him if he could help me find his way back home after dinner. And he said, well, I don't know the way. And I said, well, do you live in the mailbox? And he just cracked up. And I said, do you live in the pizza parlor? And I kept asking him questions. And everyone that made him laugh when we got home, I would write them down. And that was my first children's book. And that led to all kinds of other things. But it was that moment where it made somebody laugh. And that is so critical, I think, and resonates so much with children. Because if they're laughing, then you know you've found the right way and the right voice. And I have to thank you all for coming together from around the globe in all different time zones and sharing your stories with us. Thank you all.
If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to download the Lingokids app, so that you can explore our in-app parents community and be part of all the great families around the world who are raising amazing kids. For ideas on activities to do with your child, or for general parenting advice and conversations, subscribe to this channel. See you next time.